see. For any of you who may be unfamiliar with the background to an inaugural lecture, these lectures provide the university with a unique opportunity to celebrate the achievements of our new professors, and they represent a significant career milestone. So they give us a chance to learn a little bit about our new professors as well and hear about their work to date. So today we're going to celebrate the achievements of Professor Mark McEntee, Professor of Diagnostic Radiography. Mark is an internationally renowned researcher and one of the world's top medical radiation scientists. It has been our great pleasure to work alongside Mark since he joined us in 2019. I'm delighted that we are joined online today by Mark's father, Pat, and mother, Maureen, as well as his brothers and their families. I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all. I wish we could meet Pat and Maureen in person today to thank them for what Mark has described to us as a happy home and a solid base for their 5 sons to launch from. The support which Mark has received from his family has clearly been a driving factor in his success, and we in the College of Medicine and Health have the pleasure of reaping the benefits. I should note that we are in the company of a celebrity today. As Pat, Mark's father, is, I understand, somewhat of a local legend in the country music scene and a Country Music Hall of Fame recipient. Now, if we were here in person, we might have Pat performing for us, but unfortunately, Pat, that'll have to wait for another day, but I look forward to it in the future. He and Mark actually played together in the band Blue Mist for many years, and Pat worked for many years also in Barcastle Meat Factory as a butcher's instructor, so teaching runs in the family, before setting up a series of businesses. He currently runs a busy rural transport company in Monaghan. He's a keen gardener and a loving husband to Maureen for 47 years. Maureen, the daughter of Mary and Fred Smith, worked as an office assistant in McCarran Meats, Cavan, before she gave up work to raise her 5 boys. She met Pat by following his band wherever they went. Well done, Maureen. You obviously reaped success from that, until eventually they got to talking. And obviously Pat was as good as she thought he was, because they got together, and the rest, as they say, is history. And Maureen has been the heart of the home and is very much cherished by her family. Mark has 4 brothers, of whom he is very, very proud: Gary, Adrian, Ewan, and John Paul. Their wives and children have extended the family, and Pat and Maureen now have 5 sons, 4 daughters-in-law, 9 grandchildren, and another on the way. I know Mark is looking forward to the family all being together again very soon. This past year has emphasized for us all the importance of coming together as family. When we were developing the program in radiography, and this took place over a number of years, and in fact, when I came to this post, it was underway, and I picked up the theme as I came into post and saw that there was a lot going on in terms of establishing the discipline of radiography, and it very quickly became clear to us that leading academics were thin on the ground in radiography. There's some very good and very excellent practitioners out there, but we were looking for a very special kind of leader. We had to go all the way to Australia to find the person that we really wanted, who was Mark, of course. Once we had identified him, there began what I can only call a courtship. With Professor Michael Marr, made very regular correspondence with him, and I'm grateful to Michael for identifying Mark and for picking up the phone, because there's nothing to rival that one-to-one conversation. And indeed, once Michael had made contact, I spoke to Mark myself, and I was just saying to Mark earlier, we spoke many an evening, me from my kitchen, him from his office, because of the time difference, of course. But we were able to persuade Mark to take an interest, and I'm absolutely delighted that we did. But it wasn't the first time I'd come across Mark. from a time when I used to review grant applications for the Health Research Board, Mark's name was a very familiar sight with some excellent applications. So I certainly knew of him already and knew that he would be a fantastic person for the position. So we were very delighted to recruit Mark back from Australia. He clearly has a very successful trajectory from the University of Sydney, making us all the more grateful that he chose to come and help us to build academic radiography in Ireland. And thank you, Mark, for taking up the challenge. Now, before I hand you over to our head of the School of Medicine, Professor Paula O'Leary, I will take this opportunity to note that there will be an opportunity for questions and answers after Mark's lecture today. If you take a look at the chat section on your screen, you will see Robert has provided you with the necessary details. I will now hand over to Professor O'Leary, who will welcome Mark on behalf of the school. And I look forward to hearing your presentation after that, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Welch, and welcome, Mark. You've been with us for a little while, but I truly do want to formally welcome you in this forum to the School of Medicine and indeed to UCC. Since I think you came just very shortly after I commenced the deanship of the school, and we've worked quite closely together since your arrival here in Cork, and more particularly since the discipline of radiography came under the umbrella of the School of Medicine and indeed the Department of Medicine. And I think that that's a very good alliance, and we work very well together, and I've been very grateful for your collegiality since you've come. What Helen said is absolutely true, and it is absolutely true to say that Mark McEntee is truly one of the foremost medical radiation scientists in the world. The H indices and the citation indices say that. It's not just me saying that. And Mark has published over 200 peer-reviewed papers, published books, and is one of the best recognized academic names in the world in his area. And we're delighted to have somebody of that repute in our school and in our university. It's our honor, Mark, to have you working with us. And it's great that you're one of our own. And that's a Cork woman saying that to a Monaghan man, but we very much see you as one of our own, Mark. Just to give you a little bit of background about Mark's progress, Mark undertook his primary degree in radiography in the University of Ulster. I think, Mark, you clearly saw a pathway for you in academic practice very early on, and you undertook a very successful PhD at UCD, where you worked as a lecturer. And from there, you moved to the University of Salford. Again, I think an institution in the UK with a very high regard and reputation in the area of radiography. And I'm learning more about this all of the time. And from there on to an associate professorship in the University of Sydney. And while your publications, your grants, and your work in the area of radiography, particularly on, I suppose, optimization of dosing of radiation, perception of image and interpretation of the image and how different factors can impact on that. And I would have to say as well, your publication in the areas of education in your field, that as well as that, and as well as the reputation and the academic importance of that, what's very clear from your previous posts, and certainly from this post, is your absolute excellence and commitment to teaching and education at the highest standards. And this has been recognized on a day-to-day basis by the students and those that you work with, but it's also been recognized formally at each of the academic institutions that you've worked for, where you have received teaching awards, and indeed you've received a National Teaching Award for your for that in Australia. You were also recognized as a higher fellow or a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy, which represents teaching in third level and advanced sectors in the UK. And we're really very delighted that we have such a strong mentor for education in the third level sector in the area. Beyond that, I would have to say you are a dynamo. You've been here 2 years. You have flipped schools from the School of Therapies, who supported this program in its initiating phase and in its early phase. And you've moved into the School of Medicine, which is the largest, and I keep saying to people, the most complex school in the university, I believe it is. And you have settled in and contributed from the very beginning. And you've been a fantastic colleague in that regard. You come with great ideas, suggestions, and you're always alert to how we can be better. And I appreciate that from you, Mark. As well as that, you've taken up the gauntlet of not only supporting one program in its infancy, a diagnostic radiography, but you've also taken up the gauntlet and the challenge to develop a second program almost instantly. And you've launched a master's training program in radiation therapy. And you've helped us to build our way into that very quickly and successfully. And that's really no mean feat, given everything else that you've had to do, Mark. I could go on. You've also agreed, and you show tremendous, I suppose, perspective and background to lead our Athena Swan project for the School of Medicine. And that's going to be a major initiative and an important initiative for the school. And I'm grateful that you're taking that on. So I think what I'm trying to say is that Mark is a fantastic colleague. He's fantastically able, but he's fantastically cooperative as well. And we're very lucky to have you, Mark. We look forward to hearing something about what actually is your area of academic interest, and to give you the opportunity to speak to the broader school and others that are joining us. I'm delighted your family are here. I know that they must be so proud of you, because we are, Mark, and we only know you for a few years. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Welton and Professor O'Leary. I have to say that that was very heartwarming, and I only hope now that my presentation can live up to the expectations set by that introduction. So without any further ado, I will begin to bring you through some of the highlights and some of the areas that I've chosen to bring to your attention today. It's a great honor to present my inaugural professorial presentation to my new colleagues, and I have to honestly say my new friends here at University College Cork. Today I'm going to talk about the invisible light. You won't believe your eyes. I'm going to talk about some of the aspects of medical imaging that are important in understanding the diagnosis of disease, injury. I'm going to talk about some of the important perceptual issues that make it so difficult to recognize disease and injury. And today's lecture I want to dedicate to my wonderful family. As Professor Welton indicated, Maureen and Pat raised 5 strong, independent boys. People always used to say to my mother, "Oh, God help your mother, 5 boys and not a girl around the place." And in fairness, we really did need that female touch. Mum had many years of suffering presents like vacuum cleaners at Christmas, dishwashers, etc. We really had no understanding. And until the first of the wives-to-be came along, Brenda, and she turned up on the first Christmas and she handed Mum a handbag. And I think the penny dropped, you know, that Mum would like things like that. And there has been no shortage of strong female guidance in our household ever since. And since this photo was taken some time ago, there actually have been 3 new additions since this photo. So the family is growing, with Shane over in Galway, Ellis up in Monaghan, and a new addition, little Blaheen, who was just born a couple of weeks ago. And we really can't wait to get together again. It just hasn't been the opportunities due to COVID, that well-used expression, these past few years. On reflection towards today's presentation, I just had to reflect on how funny life is. Sometimes life just takes you by the hand and leads you, and you just don't know where you're going. I had no idea that I was heading to Cork. And it wasn't until I arrived here that I realized that this is where I was always heading. It's a very strange sensation to realize that you've reached the point that you were aiming for so long. People always joke about Cork being the real capital. And you know, sometimes it's taken seriously, sometimes it's treated as a joke. But it's not actually until you live here that you realize the vastness of the county. There's probably no better county in Ireland to be locked down in, and during the lockdowns that limited you to the county, we had a vast area to explore. I was recently in Dorsey Island, which is an island in the very far west of West Cork. It was about 2 weeks ago, and I was amazed to find that it took me 2 hours to travel back from the west of Cork to County Cork. Now, when you consider that it takes me about 4 hours to get home to Monaghan, it's just unbelievable the size and the amount of travel that can be done in this area. These are a few images that I've taken over the time that I've been here, just of the spectacular beauty of the area. But the other thing I found that I was slightly surprised to find, I suppose, was the extent of the support and the friendship. I never imagined actually that, you know, when you'd move to a new city, that you would pick up friends so quickly. Having had the experience of moving to Belfast, moving to Dublin, being in Manchester, being in Sydney, I understand how difficult it is to make new friendships. But it wasn't long after I arrived that I was contacted by Yvonne Pranisi, Dr. Yvonne Pranisi in occupational therapy, who offered to take me on a coffee tour of Cork, understanding the Australian need for good quality coffee. She took me around the very best of Cork's coffee offerings, and I have to say she was spot on each of her suggestions. And very next door in the Bon Secours, Kieran Walsh, the radiography services manager, straight away out the door, welcoming, offering to give a tour of the city and the hospitals, and making me very welcome. And I found that same experience across all of the radiography departments in the South-Southwest Hospital Group. Everywhere we go, we're welcomed, we're encouraged, and we have a great profession behind us and supporting us. And when you talk about friendly, this is a cat, isn't my cat, that regularly visits my house. I think Cork cats are particularly friendly, and this might be an individual example. He'll come in the door, he'll sniff around, spend some time on my desk, and then he'll head off again. I don't know who owns him, but I'll tell you, it's a good example of how friendly the people and animals of Cork actually are. But they say that all pleasure comes with a bit of pain, and the beginning of my journey had to start in Dublin. Oh, I'm only joking, of course. I had great mentors in UCD, and I'd like to thank today particularly Associate Professor Keith Matthews in UCD School of Diagnostic Imaging. Way back then in 1999, she took a big gamble, you know, on a slightly dodgy, lanky Monaghan boy back in 1999, but encouraged and developed and helped, along with Professor Patrick Brennan, really started me off on a great trajectory in academia. They encouraged me to get involved with the profession, to get involved in leadership, and I became a member of the Council of the Irish Institute of Radiography, and then got elected as president. And during that time, we changed the Institute's name from Institute of Radiography to the Institute of Radiography and Radiation Therapy, a foreboding, if you will, to what we've developed here in UCC at this time. During that time, as president of the Institute, we began negotiations with the Department of Health to expand the role of the radiographer into practitioner status, to give us the ability to request, amend, change X-ray requests. And we pushed for state registration to give us the standards and the code of conduct and ethics that we desired. I was the inaugural Health and Social Care Professions radiographer rep back in 2005, and we worked on establishing the Radiographers Registration Board. I recently came across this paper cutting that my father had actually kept of the time that I met with Mary Harney, and we lobbied her for practitioner status. And in fact, all of those things did come to fruition. So I'd like to thank the Irish Institute of Radiography and Radiation Therapy for the opportunities for leadership that they give to people. In 2007, we moved from Herbert Avenue down beside St. Vincent's Hospital up to UCD Belfield campus. And this was the first of 3 new builds that I was to be involved in. It has become, coincidentally, a sort of a theme. Everywhere I go, there seems to be a new building being built or a new building to be built, which has become a little bit of a passion and an interest of mine, a side interest. And in 2010, on a cold winter's evening in Belfield, the phone rang, and a nice young man with a very Australian accent said, "G'day, mate. Do you fancy working in Australia?" And it took a good few more drenchings waiting for the 46A bus to Belfield before I finally made up my mind, and off I went to the University of Sydney. The University of Sydney is a very supportive environment to work and learn in. And I have to thank from the bottom of my heart the mentors that I had there, particularly Professor Patrick Bennon, who's a fellow Monaghan man actually, who did his PhD in radiobiology and is a radiographer as well. He's a Professor of Diagnostic Radiography in the University of Sydney. But also the Dean of Health Sciences, Professor Kathy Refshurgi, and Professor Michelle Lincoln, who, although University of Sydney is not Cork, it has an incredible reputation and it really values mentorship and rewards leadership. And it was under the guidance of Professor Lincoln that I really became a university teacher, began to understand properly what it means to teach. You know, it is easy for us to forget in universities that we employ someone and we call them a lecturer. We then place them in a lecture theatre and we give them a schedule and we ask them to deliver a lecture. But what we actually expect of them is for them to teach. So in the University of Sydney, I helped students to learn by creating a large library of technique videos and embedded these within the learning management system with quizzes and feedback to prepare them for class. And when they came to class then, we spent the time focusing on the evidence base, on the discussions, on widening the debate around how you do things and why you do things rather than the technique. This really, the students loved it and their confidence increased. And the university recognized that work with a Vice Chancellor's Teaching Award for teaching excellence. We continued to develop that idea and I built a sort of a platform copying Netflix. We called it MRS Flix, where the students could watch chapters of videos without interruption. You know, we recognize that the end of a video is an opportunity to stop, take a break, have a coffee. So if we keep the videos rolling, like Netflix just keeps going, you don't get up, you don't make the cup of tea. The amount of video completions rocketed, and also the students' grades went up. So we saw that there was really something good in this package that we were developing. So we expanded it. We made more videos, we made more professional videos. We got grants to make higher quality. And we developed a massive online open course, which is free and available for anybody who's interested. It's called Life, Health and Radiation. It's had over 4,000 people enroll in it. And it's rated quite highly at 4.8 out of 5. And you know what the internet's like, people are pretty harsh. So that's a good rating. And it's just a very good introduction into radiation and how it is compatible and interacts with life and our health. So that innovation was recognized then with an Australian award for teaching and learning. And it's only in an environment where you have mentors and supporters like Professor Refshurgi and Lincoln that you can really develop and expand into those areas and really take these ideas forward. From the University of Sydney, I was also privileged to be given an international, by the International Society of Radiographers and Radiological Technologists, the opportunity to visit Malaysia and develop quality assurance practices among radiographers there. So unfortunately, this begins a series of photographs in which the main theme seems to be me looking ridiculously tall in every photo. I can assure you that I'm not, but I think that it might be an issue of perspective. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I went from there with the World Health Organization to Sri Lanka, where we helped develop a business case for bringing a PET CT scanner to the to the General Sir John Cadwalla Defence University. And here we have the pictures of the radiographers and the academic staff. The radiographers shown on the right-hand side of the screen in blue, with probably the most impressive radiography uniform that I've seen anywhere in the world, and the academic staff over on the opposite side. It was a great opportunity to develop the profession of radiography in Sri Lanka. I was then invited by the Singaporean government as an expert fellow to the Singapore General Hospital. Unfortunately, it's a terrible close-up picture, but the Singaporean government gave me the opportunity to embed within the health service and help develop a radiographer abnormality detection service. So this isn't a full and final report. This is between the time that the image is taken and the general doctor in emergency sees the image, the radiographer can give a written comment to help the process along. It's not a full and final report, that's provided by the radiologist. But these radiographers were driven and hungry for the opportunity. And you can see the enthusiasm in the photograph, and you can see in the background Celine Tan and Lee Hoon, who are standing at the back of the classroom. They were the leaders here. They continued the development of radiographer abnormality detection in Singapore. And just this year, we published a paper about the accuracy rates of Singaporean radiographers doing abnormality detection in the emergency department. And what we're finding is that the radiographers, after only about 3 months, 2 to 3 months of experiential learning and blended learning, a combination of online and in person, they're achieving accuracy rates of between 96 and 99.9%. One of the radiographers had an accuracy rate of 99.9%. An amazing achievement with a little intervention. So now what happens in Singapore is that patients have their image in the emergency department, the radiographer looks at it, and far fewer patients are sent home with injuries. Now, these injuries would eventually be found when the radiologist looks at the image, but now the radiographers are bringing their expertise and the patients don't go home with injuries. I also had the opportunity and I'm privileged that the World Health Organization asked me to go on a mission to the Kingdom of Tonga, where, as you can see from the pictures, the radiographers there were absolutely delighted that I immediately started teaching and assessing them. And you know, this was you know, they had been thinking ahead. They actually had a classroom in their X-ray department, and we over the course of a couple of weeks, what it worked out was that they had no qualifications, but they had a deep level of professional knowledge. So I started working with the chief radiographer there, Lee Aloha Mafaki, and with Dr. Anna, who was the radiologist. And we put together a curriculum for a level 6 ordinary degree. And we put it through to the Tongan National Accreditation Board. And in fact, it was approved as a qualification. I later learned that level 6 was actually the highest level of qualifications available in Tonga. And it meant that Tongan radiographers were actually eligible to apply for degree programs in other universities across the South Asian and Pacific region, such as the University of Fiji. Unwittingly as well, it meant that the radiographers, because they had a level 6 degree now, were entitled to a pay rise, which was a great bonus for them. But this probably explains why, although the Minister for Health in Tonga is presenting me with a traditional coconut symbol of thanks, he doesn't look too pleased. Whereas Dr. Anna is obviously delighted. And it was a great opportunity to help radiographer development in Southeast Asia. Before I left Sydney, as is now, I think, a little bit of a theme in my career, we had to create a new building. And the Susan Wakel Health Building was built. This was due to the generous donation of Susan and Isaac Wakel, a Sydney family who wanted to leave a legacy to the university. They donated $35 million towards this building. It was a $250 million building. And I was the academic lead for the Susan Wakel Health Building for a couple of years before I left. And I have to say, leaving that building site was one of the most difficult things about leaving Sydney. And I do look forward, after all of this, these travel restrictions are lifted, to going back and actually seeing the completed building. But in reality, any country that needs to add another color to their heat map, the Australians added purple on top of black to indicate degree temperatures of 54 degrees plus during 2019. Any country that has a heat map that looks like this on your daily news is not suited to a white pasty Irish boy. And when it came to, when the phone eventually rang and Professor Michael Maher was on the other line, he promised me that Cork was the Mediterranean of Ireland, and that, that it was a great environment to live and work. It only took a few more scorchings while waiting on the North Sydney train for me to make my mind up, and off I went. There was another new bill going on at the time, and everybody involved, too many to thank, but I'll try and thank them later, put in place fantastic resources for a new program. I was now a professor in UCC and I had made it into the Irish Examiner, and according to everybody that I know in this area, that means that you've actually made it. The diagnostic radiography program is fantastic, and it attracts fantastic students that are already cementing UCC radiographers' reputation in the workforce. It's a growing program, and we have a fantastic team that keep me in line and keep me on track on a daily basis, and are constantly watching out for each other and watching each other's backs. They're a credit to UCC, and they're a credit to Cork. Grania Curran, Niamh Moore, Rena Young, Teresa O'Donovan, Marguerite Reardon. And I also have to mention Andy Scally, pictured in the center in the LFAT, who was a rock of sense in the early years of setting up the course, but has retired at this point. But we're so grateful for all he left us. As Helen also mentioned, we got right to developing a new course, an MSc in radiation therapy. And it is with great pride that I can say that Teresa O'Donovan and Anne-Marie Devine have worked tirelessly over the last few months and submitted all of the documentation for accreditation of this program. And it really is truly in fantastic shape. Bringing a Master's of Radiation Therapy to the region, providing stability and retention for radiation therapists in the new builds of CUH and the bonds next door, where they have the best and world-leading radiation therapy facilities. The alignment of these things can only benefit the health and well-being of the people of Cork and the greater, wider region. There are so many people to thank, and I want to, when you start naming names, you're always going to leave someone behind, so I apologize to anybody if I do that, but I have to thank Professors Welton, Jackson and Muller for their support. Particularly Professor Maher, who's gone way beyond the line of duty to support radiographers. I mentioned Yvonne Panisi and Kieran Walsh already for their friendship. Anne O'Sullivan, the manager of the School of Clinical Therapies, did an amazing job of getting the paperwork and all of the documentation through. And Emer Kyohan, who brought in sponsors for the program. Every day, our students and our patients' lives are made better by the sponsors of this program. Students are enabled to get their education by this sponsorship, and patients are enabled to get better care. Affidea, Alliance Medical, Bayer, GE and Synapse are to be greatly thanked. Our partners in the HSE are invaluable, and their support has been there from the beginning, and without them there would be no program. The program has international aspirations. MSc Radiation Therapy and Diagnostic Radiography have international ambitions. All of our students are members of the Irish Institute of Radiography and Radiation Therapy, and the program is a member of the European Federation of Radiography Societies, and we're also a member of the European Institute for Biomedical Imaging Research. So I said I was going to talk about the invisible light. What did I mean? Well, back in November the 8th, 1895, Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen was playing with a vacuum tube, trying to run electricity across the vacuum, a new area of science at the time. To his surprise, he noted that that his cardboard shrouded tube, while charged, objects across the room began to glow. He started holding materials because it was unknown. He didn't know what the ray was, so he called it an X-ray. He called his wife in, and he took an X-ray of her hand for the first time. This is the famous first X-ray of Bertha Röntgen, and you can see, of course, that it looks quite skeletal. And she said when she saw the image, "I have seen my own death." Röntgen himself didn't know what he had discovered. He said he had discovered something interesting, but I'm not sure if my observation is correct. He used the scientific method to confirm it. He won the first Nobel Prize in 1901, and declined to seek proprietary claims for X-rays. He didn't seek to patent it. And think of how the world would have been different if one person owned the technology. He gave it away because he knew it was too important. They really should be called Röntgen rays, and I think that would be appropriate. In America, they actually are. We have the American Röntgen Ray Society, and one of the world's best journals is called the American Journal of Röntgenology. This would certainly improve people's knowledge of who discovered X-rays. But Röntgen didn't know that this invisible light was dangerous. Today, we understand radiation risk using the linear no threshold model. This was established in quite a dark way, established by the Americans after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We can see these red dots on the graph on the left-hand side. These are the data points from the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they point downwards in a line. More recently, we have developed methods of examining the genome of patients after radiation effects. And we can see that down at very low levels of diagnostic radiography, we are seeing damage to cells and repair by cells. In this interesting example published by Nguyen et al., we can see that patients with between 60 and 80 millisieverts are showing almost no damage, while another patient who has between 20 and 40 millisieverts is showing 40% of their cells being damaged. This points to an important fact, that the ability to repair from radiation damage is a very individual thing. And it comes down to an individual's biology and also the mutations that they have. If they have mutations to BRCA1 or 2, gamma H2AX or P53, their repair pathways are not going to be working, so the damage will not repair. So radiation dose reduction is a very important aspect of patient safety in medical imaging. Diagnostic reference levels, or DRLs, are a practice to promote optimization. And it's important to recognize that DRLs are one of the steps, one of many steps in the overall process of optimization. Over many years, I've established these diagnostic reference levels in various countries with an aim to reduce radiation dose and the exposure to the population from the harmful effects of radiation. DRLs have been shown to reduce patient doses by between 28 and 47% over time as they drive down radiation doses. And you can see that I've left a trail of DRLs across the planet from almost in a straight line from Ireland to New Zealand and back. But we established with Associate Professor Shane Foley in UCD back in 2012, diagnostic reference levels for CT in Ireland. We then did the same in Portugal with Dr. Joana Santos. We did the same in Malta with Dr. Frankie Zarb. And we're doing the same currently in Nigeria, which is a population of 200 million people, with Idris Scarborough, a radiographer, an MSc graduate from University of Malta. We've achieved the same with many diagnostic reference levels set in Jordan, in the Middle East, and in the Saudi Arabia as well with Dr. Ali Al-Hili. Finally, in this sequence, traveling across the planet, we also established diagnostic reference levels across Australia for many different examinations, one for PET-CT in Australia and in New Zealand. But mammography is an area that I'm very interested in, and optimizing the radiation dose in that area has always been an important driver for myself. I recruited a very bright PhD student called Moad Suleiman in Australia, and we set about the task of establishing diagnostic reference levels for mammography across New South Wales. We had the support of Breastscreen New South Wales, and we were able to get a data set of 52,000 mammograms from over 1,200 cases. In this, we were able to identify clear and obvious areas for optimization, where some technologies were producing much lower doses than others. But one thing we established during that study, and as you may have noticed, not all breasts are the same, but the formulas for calculating the dose to breasts that are used internationally and published in the physics journals, they use 50-50 in many cases, 50% fat and 50% fibroglandular tissue for an estimate of the breast. But this does not hold true when you actually measure it. When we have measured breast density across multiple different systems, the most thorough investigation of ours using digital breast tomosynthesis, which is a 3D mammogram, finds that the most dense breasts only contain somewhere between 15 to 17, in the most dense, 15 to 17% of fibroglandular tissue. So there's no such thing as a 50% dense breast, although this is well understood by the radiologists. In the physics quantification of dose, it's quite a big difference. So what we did with Dr. Suleiman was we created a dose measurement that integrates the individual breast density of the patient, personalizing the dose. Rather than having a generic 50-50 for all women, we personalize that individual person's dose based on their own breast fat and dense distribution. And this was then adopted as a new algorithm within New South Wales breast. We introduced a dose in CT. Dr. Frankie Zarb and Associate Professor Shane Foley, who's actually a Ballincollig native. And I want to thank them for their great work in this area and for their many years of collaboration that we've had. Dr. Zarb reduced doses in Malta by using a porcine model. So we were imaging a pig. And it's actually incredible how alike the human anatomy and the porcine anatomy are. So we're able to use the imaging of the pig to optimize and reduce doses by up to 38% for the CT scanning in Malta. Associate Professor Foley in UCD has investigated multiple innovative ways of reducing doses to the breast. And this is an example of reducing breast dose during a cardiac CT by pushing the breasts out of the region of interest. So here we can see the chest area with the heart and the breast tissue pushed out of the way, using effectively what is a girdle to push the breasts upwards. This reduces dose greatly and reduced dose to patients' breast tissue by up to 25% during cardiac CTs. Dr. Kamarul Abdullah used novel 3D printed technology to create simulations of the heart and the vessels of the heart to establish the lower limits of dose optimization during cardiac CT. Now, 3D printers are extremely sensitive. They don't like it if it's too bright. They don't like it if it's too hot. They don't like vibration. In fact, they don't like to work at all. But Dr. Abdullah is a 3D printer whisperer, and he was able to create these really intricate 3D models of the heart that we then used for optimization of CT doses. And we were able to achieve a 50% dose reduction from standard practice by demonstrating that the technique worked on 3D printed phantoms first, which is very innovative and a new technique in dose optimization. Now, I also mentioned in the title that you won't believe your eyes. What did I mean by that? Well, simply, if you have a look at this image, the human visual system is a wondrous thing, but it is easily fooled. The example here is when you look at this image, the blocking effect of the black and white squares gives you the impression that the lines are not parallel, when in fact, these lines are exactly parallel in this image. Now, I'd like to draw your attention in this image to squares A and B. What color are those squares? It's not a trick question. I'd like you to take your time, look at square A and look at square B, and what color are they? Now, if you said square A is gray and square B is white, it's totally understandable that you would say that, but you're wrong. And you won't believe your eyes, even after I same shade of gray. But our human vision understands what a checkerboard pattern is. It understands what shadow is. We need to understand shadow. And so the brain overwrites what the physical information entering the eye is and says, that's a shadow and that's a checkerboard. And so A and B are not the same color, when in fact they are. You this in, and even when you can see and touch your own teeth, the visual stimulus overrides what we can sense in the real world. He's very determined to know where his teeth are, even though his teeth are firmly in his
Mommy,
head.
where's my face? I said, Mommy, where's my face? Mommy, where's my face?
Not so worried about that. So it's there in our brain. Visual stimulus is really important. We need to understand the world that we see in front of us. So our eyes actually play tricks on us to make sure that we don't make mistakes. Sometimes this is a problem, sometimes this is a benefit. Myself and colleagues in University of Sydney, in University College Dublin, have come up with a system we call the Pop-Up Research Centre to investigate these perceptual phenomena. So how does the human visual system work? When does it play a trick on us? And we have gone around the world going to where the experts are. And for example, this is in a small city, 14th city in America, Louisville, Kentucky. The American Board of Radiologists used to descend there every year for their annual faculty examinations where residents were tested. And we went there and we ran experiments on these experts. Standing in the middle of the room is Dr. Trafton Drew. And this is during our experiments. We have multiple PhD students working on projects with radiologists all around this pop-up research center. Very innovative. This perceptual research is presented at conferences like the Medical Image Perception Society, of which I'm the secretary, and we have our conference coming up in York next year, fingers crossed. We do these pop-ups wherever the opportunity arises, Darwin in the Northern Territories, Salford in the UK, and we do sophisticated things there, like, for example, eye tracking. This is where we place glasses on the participant, and the glasses contain a camera that follow where the participant is watching. This provides us with great information to understand how radiologists are perceiving images and what affects their perception, what affects when they see a cancer or when they don't. The video you're looking at the moment is showing blue bubbles. These blue bubbles are eye fixations, somewhere that the radiologist has focused their eyes. The little blue lines are called saccades, and they show where the eye is dotting and which direction it is going in. by looking at patterns in fixations and saccades, we can tell a lot about how radiologists are searching and how our experimental paradigm has affected how they search. This, for example, is a video of Dr. Ella Casaruni, the chair of the Thoracic Radiology Board of the American Board of Radiology. She amazingly gets through 30 images, correctly identifying all of those with cancer and all of those without in a matter of about 5 minutes, without making any mistakes, which is pretty incredible. So we've used these techniques to examine things like prevalence expectation. What is prevalence expectation? Well, prevalence is the rate, it's the number of people in the population who have a disease at any given time. The prevalence expectation is, in this case, the radiologist's expectation of the disease and the image based on the clinical index, the clinical indications or the context. So what's the chances that this patient has the disease given the clinical context? That gives them an indication of the prevalence. So for example, screening takes in patients with no symptoms who are well. And so the prevalence expectation there would be very low. You'd expect that there would be low disease. However, if you're doing a cancer follow-up clinic, your prevalence expectation would be high because you already know that these patients are unwell. So by using eye tracking, we've been able to identify that that basically low prevalence situations lead to more false negative decisions. So when there are very few cancers in the examination, when there's very few cancers in the population, that's low prevalence. And that means that the radiologists are going to make more false negative decisions. That means that they're going to say that the patient is normal when in fact they do have the disease. Now, more work is needed in this area, and actually running these experiments is difficult, complicated, and sometimes expensive. But certainly the prevalence expectation has an effect on the way in which we visualize images. Okay, so in the next slide, I want you to pay attention.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
Did you do it?
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So this is the idea of
This
this is the idea of inattentional blindness. And inattentional blindness happens to us all in that scenario. For example, some of you will have seen that before and will have spotted it. Others of you won't believe the fact that you couldn't have seen that.
In life, being
did another
focused helps
experiment
us
on this.
ignore distractions, but this focus can cause us to overlook unexpected opportunities. Similarly, when we focus our attention on finding a particular object, we often fail to notice other unexpected objects, a phenomenon referred to as inattentional blindness. Dr. Trafton Drew and research colleagues from the Visual Attention Lab at Harvard Medical School decided to examine if inattentional blindness also exists in the eyes of trained experts, such as radiologists. In a recent study published in Psychological Science, Dr. Drew asked 24 radiologists to search for signs of lung cancer in 239 frames of a chest CT scan. In this stack of images, he inserted 5 consecutive frames containing an image of a gorilla. Despite superior ability of radiologists to detect lung cancer nodules, 20 of the 24 radiologists did not report noticing the gorilla. Interestingly, eye tracking revealed that most of the that even experts who routinely detect cancer nodules, which are about 48 times smaller than the image of the gorilla, are also susceptible to limitations of attention. By understanding these limitations, future research may help reduce errors committed by experts in diagnostic radiology, baggage screening, and many other professions that
So that
involve
is
searching
not to
for
say that
items that are
radiologists don't
difficult to
find
find.
cancers. It's when you ask them to look for one thing that you won't notice the other. It demonstrates that inattentional blindness affects us all, regardless of your expertise. We carried out that work with Dr. Drew and the Harvard Imaging Lab in one of our pop-up research centers. I want to talk a little bit about breast cancer. Now, this is an image of a mammogram. This is what two craniocaudal images of mammography look like. There is cancer on this image, but it is imperceptible. What do I mean by that? I mean that no one would have known that it was there unless they see it grow and see it in later images. So this is the later image. Can you see it? If you flick back and forth, you might think that cancer looks really obvious on a mammogram. It doesn't. This is the cancer after it's grown some more. It was there in the previous images, but it's really hard to see here because it looks like the rest of the background anatomy. And if we use a 3D mammogram, we can see it even more clearly, but we don't know exactly when to use the 3D mammogram. There aren't as many of those machines, and there are more dose. So mammography is a very difficult task. It's sort of like doing Where's Wally? Can you see Where's Wally? Can you see Wally in this image? Now imagine that it was in black and white. Now imagine that Wally only turns up in one in every couple of 100 images. Mammography is very difficult. Now, just for those of you who found him, you're correct. He was there right in the middle, an easy one. Professor Patrick Brennan and Professor Warwick Lee in New South Wales Breastscreen set up the Breastscreen reader assessment strategy to try and improve the detection of difficult cancers for radiologists. The mechanism is to get cases that are known, have known truth, known positive or known negative, and to give radiologists feedback on these using a realistic clinical environment. The breast strategy, the whole team of us working together have demonstrated over years that this improves the performance of radiologists by up to 34% on average. But it also demonstrated that dense breasts and fatty breasts are very different. On the right-hand side, we see a dense breast. There's a cancer in that circle, but it's really hard to see because it's the same as the background. On the right-hand side, we have a cancer. It's also hard to see, but it's in fat, so it stands out a little bit more. Our research with Dr. Krisha Tapia has demonstrated that radiologists perform better on non-dense breasts or fatty breasts. Having dense breasts impairs detection on mammograms. When women have dense breasts, they're 4 to 6 times more likely to get cancer. And 43% of women do have dense breasts, and it means that their diagnosis could be delayed, and it means that they're also 18 times more likely to have a cancer develop in between scans, which is called interval cancer. I have to call out the work of Siobhan in 2015 for his work on breast density, where he identified that vitamin D, calcium, and vegetable intake are ways of reducing breast density in premenopausal women, but it is a complex area. So breast cancer is not simple because appearances of normal and abnormal overlap. And if we want to demonstrate, we have a group of patients who don't have disease, and we have a group of patients who do, and they overlap. When we make a decision, we sometimes do so with the risk that it's possibly, if we say it is cancer, it might not be. And if we say it isn't, it might be. These overlap. So when a judge ruled that we have to say with absolute confidence that, that in screening programs, before we give an all clear result, it's actually not possible. without missing cancers. So if we say with absolute confidence that someone doesn't have a cancer, we'd have all of these other patients that we can't be sure about without further tests, and we won't be sure about until they come back for later mammograms. That's not missing cancers. That's how the system, that's how mammography works. Mammography is not ideal, but it is what we have at the moment. So what are my next steps in the UCC adventure? Well, one of the things that I'm working on and will continue to work on is dementia care in radiography. Dementia touches many families, and it has touched our family thrice. We watched our mum care for her mum, and then in time we came to do the same. And my father and many carers like him out there every day, every morning, helps her get up, get ready for the day that she might not remember tomorrow. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's a sad thing. But our work in radiography and dementia care has again been recognized by Radiography Journal, and Rachel Challen, who was the lead author on this paper, was honored by Radiography Journal with the Radiography Editor's Choice Award in 2018. We found lots of examples of good care, but lots of areas that need further development. So that's an area I'm going to continue working on. Of course, AI. We've done some work on the classification of breast density using AI, and it is remarkable how well it does. It has 92% accuracy in classifying breasts into dense or non-dense. We believe this technology is an opportunity to change the screening patterns of patients, sending dense patients with dense breasts for further imaging, further screening, 3D mammography, perhaps even MRI. So working towards the use of 3D mammography for those patients of particularly high risk, but also looking at MRI. MRI has no radiation dose associated with it. It doesn't need compression, so it's more comfortable for women. However, it's a very limited resource. It's hard to believe, but there could be as few as 1 slot per week for MRI of women with no symptoms in CUH. And that's just because the scanner is used all of the time for multiple different investigations. So with PhD student Peter Murphy, Professor Maher, and Professor Max Ryan, we're going to look at an abbreviated screening protocol for breast MRI that could quadruple the number of breast MRIs that could be carried out on that scanner. MRI of the breast detects more cancers than mammography, but obviously it's a very limited resource. We're continuing our work in optimization, and I'm delighted to say that Niamh Moore has taken up a PhD opportunity and is working with myself and Professor Maher and Dr. O.J. O'Connor in CUH, looking at optimization of CT in specific areas for patients who return on a regular basis. There's lots more areas of interest, but I'll say for now, thank you for all those who have helped along the way. And thank you in advance for all those who are going to help on the ways yet to come. And thank you all for your attention. Happy to take questions at this point.
Mark, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. I felt I learned lots, and so fantastic to have the time to sit and listen to you. I can understand you're clearly an outstanding teacher, and your intellectual curiosity is serving the world very well. And I can see that you have a very strong questioning ethos, which is fantastic. I'm very happy to take any questions from the chat. Just see if there are any there.
I would just like to mirror your words, Helen. And I hope that you've proved the point, Mark. And I think you've done so admirably. It was a fantastic presentation and beautifully presented. Thank you.
So, Mark, we've a question from Diana Duggan. Just wondering if you had one piece of advice to new teachers at university level, what is the one thing you would wish all teachers knew in order to meet students' needs? So I think that's
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think that if I was going to come down to one thing, it would be about authentic learning. That it's really, there are many different tasks and many different technologies that you can use in learning, and sometimes it's easy to get swept up in the use of new technology. But if I was going to advise one thing, it would be to make the learning task and the assessment authentic. And I wish I knew that at the beginning of everything. 20 years ago when we started off, a lot of our examinations were paper-based. We asked people how to do radiography, and we asked them to do that by writing an answer down on paper. It seemed to make sense at the time, and nobody was really questioning the sense of it. But it makes no sense now. And with the fantastic facilities that we have here, we're able to teach about how to do radiography by getting people to do it, and to assess them by getting them to do it. So that authenticity in learning is a critical factor.
That's lovely, Mark. Thank you. And I suppose the thing for new teachers too is not to be afraid of the students. They don't expect you to know it all, and you won't go wrong by not acknowledging that sometimes you need to find out more for people. And I think that's very helpful for students to encourage them to ask questions. So 2 short questions and lots of nice comments coming in. Tom Dowdall. Great talk. I just had 2 short questions. One, you mentioned that the ability to absorb a dose and repair is highly integration with
You're correct. There is a correlation with age. Basically, the older you get, the more likely it is that you will develop or show the signs or symptoms of a cancer. That process is basically related to let's say the cumulative effects of the damages that we receive over a long period of time. And you don't get to see the outcomes of that damage in short lives, but you get to see it in longer lives. So the longer life expectancy of people means that we're seeing cancers more frequently. In the last 100 years, life expectancy has doubled. A lot of that doubling is to do with child mortality, but there's also an extension at the end of life as well, which is very significant. So we definitely see that the cancer will show up more often as we grow older. Now, that is a cumulative effect. It's probabilistic, basically. An X-ray photon has a small, very small probability of interacting in the correct way with your body to cause a mutation. It's infinitesimally small, but there's always a probability. And this is what the linear model shows. It's even at the lowest doses, there's a small probability that you could have damage, and that damage is normally just repaired. But the more of that damage that you get, the probability of a non-repair happening goes up. So when you have higher cumulative doses and longer lifetime exposure to damages and carcinogens such as smoking and the environment and foods and radiation to a small extent too as well, then all of those eventually eventually will show in the system. So the answer to your question is that cancer is related to aging for sure, and your ability to repair gets lesser with time because of the cumulative damage.
Great, thank you, Mark. And the second question from Tom was that, is there any use in using image analysis programs on a computer to identify particular areas of mammogram that might be of particular interest when looking for cancer? I assume he's talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. It's a huge area of expansion at the moment. At the recent Radiological Society of North America in 2019, something like 75% of all of the papers had an aspect of artificial intelligence associated with them. It's a huge area for development, but these are tools. and they help with decisions. They don't make the decisions. So for example, finding that there's something unusual on an image is interesting, and machines can do that very well. But that finding needs to be correlated with the clinical scenario of the patient. Like, for example, the machine might find something that we already know about. That's not of interest anymore. The machine might find something that's new, but the machine hasn't done a biopsy, so it doesn't know if it's actually a cancer. So a person needs to use that information to make a decision then to go and do a biopsy to find the actual truth of what that is. What did the machine find? And so it certainly has a massive role to play on multiple levels. Inside the scanners nowadays, we're using artificial intelligence to make decisions about the best optimization, what reconstruction to use, what way to reconstruct the image to give the best visualization at the lowest dose. So AI is already doing those things. The active decision-making part, it's going to be a tool, it's going to be helpful, it'll get better and better, and the better it gets, the better for patients. But it never replaces the decision-making pathway of all of the things that come together. The biopsies, the investigation, the discussion with the patient, the communication of the risks and benefits of all of these examinations. Very useful tools, and we're all going to continue looking towards developing them as much as possible. And humans need to be involved in those developments. But it's very clear, even at this stage, that it's yet another tool.
Yeah.
And a very useful one at that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. So a very nice comment from Sinead, who thanks you for your great work, your insightful presentation, and in particular your work in mammography. And a thank you from Diana Duggan, from Professor Michael Mark, wonderful lecture, really excited to be working with you. And your lecture highlights vital synergy between radiography and radiology as we refine and improve medical imaging. So I think that's very true, and that came out in your presentation. So Mark, that concludes the questions. We have another one from Sean Howrahan. Well done, Mark, excellent presentation. So I must say it's exciting to hear your plans for the future, and I'm very struck by the way you have introduced efficiencies in the past. And I was wondering myself about, in terms of the radiographers screening images, you did that internationally. Is there scope to introduce that in Ireland, do you think, Mark?
I think in similar ways that there are internationally, when it benefits patients and when it fits within the current workflow, it's an important additional tool to consider. Yeah. I think that there's no point introducing these things just for the heck of it. But where the gaps exist are times like, it's Friday night at 2 a.m. The radiographer takes the image. They see a subtle fracture that they know. When you see lots and lots of normals, you get very good at spotting abnormals. It's like, I don't know what that is, but it's definitely not normal. That's the type of reaction that radiographers are brilliant at making. And so what you can do in that scenario, what the typical pathway is that the patient has a junior doctor look at that image who might not see it. And the key thing is that needs to be communicated. So from clinician to clinician, we need to communicate with each other. We need to reduce the barriers to that communication. We need to put it in the system so that, radiographers can indicate that they saw something. They don't know what it is, but it needs to be, don't send that patient home. Something looks wrong. I think that's where it fits. It fits in the areas of the service where there's currently a need. And I think we should work together, as Professor Marr said, work together with radiology to identify those areas of need, and where it can help patients, let's try it.
Yeah, it sounds a very sensible approach, Mark, and I really look forward to seeing what you do in the future. I just wanted to say it was just as well you got locked down in the largest county in Ireland, because you're clearly used to travelling to exotic places. So you've managed to find some level of exotica in Cork, I'm glad to see, and very nice images too. It remains for me to thank you, Mark, and to say how excited I am with the work you're doing and to see you developing, and the college, and I'm sure the school look forward to supporting your future endeavours, and really, really happy to have you here and to be working with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And we do hope to see the McEntee extended family in Cork at some stage. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.